That is correct.
And allow me to say good morning to everyone.
Right, the general manager, welcome.
Yeah, I was saying good morning to Director Alvarez and Director Williams, but I neglected to say good morning to those who are joining remotely. So good morning to each and every one of you.
Well,
Good morning.
good morning. I will then. It's 10:03. I'll call the meeting to order, and let's call the roll to see if we have a quorum. Okay, who's going to do the roll call? Greg,
I will do the roll call, President Deere.
go ahead, please.
So we'll begin with Director Alvarez.
Here.
Director Gray.
Here.
Director Williams.
Here.
Director Houston.
Here.
And President Deere.
Here, so we have all 5 board members present. And is there any public comments?
We have no public comments today, President Deere.
All right. There are no presentations, I assume.
No presentations.
No action calendar items.
We do not have any action calendar items.
So
but
go to
we
our
do-
information calendar.
Okay, fantastic. We do have an information item for you today. It concerns our fiscal year budget for 22-23, which will review our overall revenues and expenses. And our Executive Manager of Finance, Margaret Moja, will provide you with a presentation. And just as a quick highlight, you may recall that we've had a few budget workshops with the committee and with the directors dating back to January 2019. And we are here today to give you a presentation on the overall revenues and expenses and a preliminary view of our proposed rates and charges. And as we provide this presentation, we have the context of the recent vote with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California in their biannual rates and charges, which I believe was at 5%. And so with that being said, the presentation today was developed with the prior rates scenarios. And so Margaret will incorporate that recent decision into her remarks as she gives the presentation today. So with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to our Executive Manager of Finance. Please, Margaret.
Good morning. Thank you, Greg, for the introduction. And again, we're happy to bring to you the next in the budget series for fiscal year 22-23 on the budget. So turning to your packet, page 5 of your packet, again, we're here, as Greg mentioned, to look at the overall revenues and expenses. That revenues and expenses is something that, again, over the last few months, we've been building up to sort of understanding what the underlying assumptions are to those expenses. We will provide you a brief update of some of those things, but then focus our energy and time, if you will, on the revenues side of the equation and some sensitivity analysis. So with that, I will ask you to go to the next slide, which is page 6 of your package. And as always, I like to begin with our mission statement. Our mission statement is provide a safe and reliable supply of high quality water to the communities we serve. So as shared, we do a number of things to be able to make that happen. We do it through our imported water purchases and that relationship with Metropolitan Water District. We do it through our recycled water operations, providing a local supply of water to the communities that we serve, serving a variety of customers from the groundwater over to our refineries and then to our irrigation customers. We do it through outreach, we do it through education, and then we also do it through our programs such as our water use efficiency conservation programs that's there. And of course, then you've got your team behind them, supporting them all through your human resources, your administration, your finance, and your contracts team. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the next slide, which is the agenda for today. We will be going through our program expenses. The idea is to provide you a context of sort of what was the numbers that we were presenting to you at the original workshop, some of those revisions that have been made either through comments made by the directors or some other revisions that we have seen along the way. We will provide that highlight for you. We will also just share with you sort of our debt service. That is an important component to our overall operating expenses. So we wanted just to share with you what that number is. And then also just provide you just a highlight of the capital expenditures. You will have a much more detailed workshop next week on the 20th, April 20th at 1 p.m. to review those capital expenditures. But we wanted just to provide you sort of a high-level view of what that 5-year outlook looks like, and sort of some general understanding around the funding associated with that. Then we'll move over to our operating revenues, where again, we'll touch upon the water sales that we had at just last week's workshop on April 6th. Then we will go into the metropolitan water rates and charges. And while, as Greg had mentioned, we had put in the original sort of staff recommendation at metropolitan at 8 and 8, meaning 8% in calendar year 23, 8% in 2024. We know that the board, Metropolitan Water District Board, did vote yesterday on a fourth option that was recommended, sort of an overnight sort of determination, and that fourth option was approved by the Metropolitan Water District Board. If I understand correctly, I believe that all those that were in attendance did vote for this proposal. So you saw a 5 and 5, which represents, if you will, the overall rate impact. And it may vary depending upon the types of services that you get, be it tier 1, tier 2, if you're treated, untreated. But to the overall Metropolitan Water District, they're showing a 5% in 2023, and 2024 also a 5%. And then finally, at the very end, we have some sensitivity analysis. Not only do we show sensitivity analysis around the water sales that was requested from us, but we also wanted to show you sensitivity analysis just to give you some bookends if we were to do a no rate increase, and then if we were also to focus in on perhaps a 5% increase, so that you can kind of see where that is. I will say to you today, this isn't about making a decision. This is just to give you some additional context. Again, I think the dialogue around the capital projects is an important one, because that will certainly play into the equation of what will our rate increases be today or into the future. It also will take into consideration our workshop on April 27th, which will focus in on sort of taking sort of a long view of it, not just looking at the 1 year, but really looking at the 5-year perspective, from the perspective of what is our capital projects, what is our water sales assumption, what is the rates assumptions. And then from there, I think we will be in a better position to really understand where do we want to settle ourselves for fiscal year 22-23. So with that as an introduction, I will ask you please to turn to the next couple slides, which begins on page 9 of your packet. Now that here is, again, I mentioned to you, we're just doing a quick overview, but I'm happy to pause if you have any additional questions or comments relating to this. But the idea behind this is we wanted to share with you in that first column, what was the adopted budget on 21-22, and then what was presented to you at the workshop. In this case, this workshop for the overhead was presented on March 16th. And then what is that revised budget based off of some of the comments that were made and how those were incorporated in there. So as you see here, year over year, we are at 4.5 million in 21-22. This was the amended amount after the board made a decision in July 2021 to move some of those memberships that were originally in the approved budget and move those dollars over to the water use efficiency, more specifically to the grass replacement program. But now you can see with those revisions based off of those recommendations, and we'll see those on the next few pages, you can see that we're down to $4.4 million. So a reduction of about $65,000. And if we can turn to the next page, page 10 of your packet, let me go to those little details a little bit more. So the district, when we shared the information about our memberships and sponsorships, we originally provided that information to you on February 23rd. That information, there was some comments made that says, I'd like us to consider some additional consideration around these 4 particular memberships. And we came back to you on March 16th and said, we would like to maintain the Alliance for Water Efficiency. We would recommend canceling our participation in the American Metropolitan Water Agency. And then we would also cancel our participation in the Climate Registry. But then we would also like to continue the Southern California Water Coalition. at $25,000. And so with that, wanted to inform you that we have incorporated those two items, number 2 and number 3. We have reduced the membership budget by $14,500 to reflect staff's recommendation based off of the input originally provided by the directors. Moving forward on to the next item there, this was an item that actually was not mentioned necessarily at a budget workshop, but was something that came in through the budget process, and that was a consideration of joining the California Contract Cities Association. Now, this will be discussed at next week's Finance and Administration Committee meeting, but for the purposes of this budget, we have included this $2,000 participation in this membership at a bronze level. Again, if the board, at next week's, committee meeting and at the board meetings, have a change of heart, we will update that to reflect either non-participation, a higher participation, or it will be this number. But wanted to share with you that we did include this particular membership at the request of a director. And then on to sponsorships there was a couple questions around sponsorships. Can you provide me a history of what that sponsorships support has been? And there was also another noted comment of, could you just reduce the budget down to $25,000? So we did provide you that information through an email, and then subsequently we did share that sort of at the March 16th workshop as well, showing you that in that sort of history, if you will, sort of even outside of the, I'll say pre-pandemic, so not the last 2 years, but pre-pandemic, we weren't spending the $93,250. We were at a range of 56,000 to 69,000, and so without a sort of a direction of a specific dollar amount, staff has actually reduced this budget down to what we have been sort of more notably been at around that $55,000 mark. And so you can see that we have reduced the budget down by $38,250 to reflect the fact that we are acknowledging that we have a changed approach, if you will, as it relates to our district sponsorships. Now, these district sponsorships are different than the community sponsorships that you have, that the directors have a separate budget for. These are more the water-related sponsorships that we've participated in. And with that, I'll turn to the next slide, slide 11, our packet. The one last thing I wanted just to comment on is, in addition to those directors' comments and what the disposition of those comments were into the budget, we did make one additional revision, which was around the discussion of memberships. We did have a line item there for available for other memberships. And with the discussion about, we need to be very mindful of the costs that are there. We have taken out, I'll say, that buffer amount and reduced our membership budget by $15,000. So that if there are any future memberships that are to be considered by the board, those would need to come to the board. We would need to amend the budget at that time to reflect the participation in those things. With all that said, you can see here's the revised numbers for our memberships and sponsorships. Again, $187,000 now down to $160,000. Just a few years ago, we were at about $320,000. So we really have taken a very deep look into the membership participation that we have here. And then, as I mentioned here on sponsorships, $93,000 reducing down to 55. So those are the two numbers there. If you look to the reduction that you saw in the overhead, it's really particularly in these two particular areas. And with that, I'll take a pause to see if there's any comments or questions regarding the overhead budget before I move on to the next one.
I have a question, Margaret.
Yes.
Just in terms of how you finally came up to these numbers. So, for example, on the sponsorships, it says staff recommends reducing the budget to $55,000. What's that based on?
Sure. And we can.
Staff wishes that it'd be $55,000. I know that there was discussion at the board that some people feel more, some people feel less is the right number, but I still don't know why we're there. And then the same thing with the Southern California Water Coalition. Staff wants to maintain the membership at $25,000, but we can be members for $1,000. So
Right.
I'd like
Absolutely.
to know the rationale behind these recommendations. There's a big difference between 25,000 and $1,000, and in terms of memberships, it gets you the same uh, entitlement. Now, you get to be a gold member or a gold founding member, etc., by paying 25,000. Although I don't think West Basin was one of the original founding members of the Southern California Water Coalition to start with. But notwithstanding that, you can pay your way to anything, I guess. I just want to know the rationale behind the recommendation.
Absolutely. Let me first begin with the Southern California Water Coalition. It was through the comments that were made by the directors at the last workshop on March 16th that there was support around the $25,000 threshold. We have a director that participates on that particular one, and we had another board member who spoke very positively about the Southern California Water Coalition, and that the dollars that we're spending there are not necessarily an amount to participate and attend lunches or whatever. It really is about the work that they do and the advocacy they do on behalf of the region that's here. And so it seems like there was general support around maintaining the sponsorship with the Southern California Water Coalition. So from our perspective, we provided information. We heard the feedback from the board on on March 16th. And as a result, based off of what is deemed to be sort of the consensus, if you will, outside of perhaps your comments that you have shared, that we then maintained that particular level, if you will, for the Southern California Water Coalition. To the first item regarding the general sponsorships, if you will, the water-related sponsorships. Again, as I mentioned to you, we provided you a 5-year history, if you will, of sort of where have our sponsorship dollars been from a budget versus actual. And I believe that, they have not been at that level, if you will, in the last 2 years, of course, because of the pandemic and these events not necessarily occurring. So when staff looked at it, we said, well, what has been, the range pre-pandemic? And again, at 1 year it was at 67, and the other couple years they had been at $56,000. And so it felt to me that if we wanted to make a dent, if you will, into sort of our sponsorships, where have we historically been spending outside of, again, pre-pandemic, at the pre-pandemic levels, and it had been around that $55,000 mark. And so that was the source, if you will, for the recommendation. And I don't know if a director would like to speak to the Southern California Water Coalition about the level of participation.
Well, in terms of, I already spoke to it. I think it's way too much money to spend. You get the exact same rights for $1,000 that you get for $25,000. And then California contract cities, when did that come up?
Again, this was a request that it come up by a director, and again, it will be considered at next week's Finance and Administration Committee, but it has been over the last, I would say in the budget period. I don't know the specifics. I didn't get the initial request. I was just understood that this item was coming before the committee and then the board this month.
Yeah, this is Board Member Houston. I can speak to these two if I may, Mr. President. No, so to Southern California Water Coalition, when we did talk about this as a group, the majority of the board members felt that the $25,000 level is appropriate to maintain. So I think that Margaret is spot on there, that's where the majority of us in consensus was, Director Alvarez. Contract cities just recently came up, and I don't even know if the other board members realize this or not, but apparently they have changed their policy in the last year or two. And technically, in order for any of us non-members to even attend their conferences or participate, we have to have some sort of a membership now. It's like an associate membership for non-city entities, if you will. And I think the lowest level is around $2,000. So it literally is something that just got sprung on us. We were trying to potentially go to the conference coming up in the next month, and basically we got rejected because we're not members, and they're sort of enforcing that now. And so to be honest with you, it was news to me. I think it was news to all of us, but apparently their board changed their policy a year or two ago. I don't know if they were not enforcing it along the way, but recently they are. So quite frankly, Contract Cities is, I think, one of the best conferences any of us do get to go to sometimes to deal with our local cities that we serve. And technically at this point, we can't go and be a participant unless we have this membership. So unfortunately, I had to ask, let's put it in next year's budget. I think it's extremely minor. And I think that my other colleagues that have been out to Contract Cities, we know the value of that organization. So so that's why that's back on here now.
Mr. Chair. Director Deere.
Director to unmute himself.
Director Deere, perhaps you can unmute yourself. Sorry, President Deere.
Okay, Director Williams, you're on.
All right, thank you very much. I would just like to say that I support everything that Director Houston talked about. Most of the cities that we serve in our district are connected to contract cities. And by supporting contract cities, we are supporting the people that we need to be, for lack of a better term, be on good terms with, kind of like be friends with. That's what I heard back in the day. And because you cannot be on the outside asking for support of your programs if you're not out supporting the other guys' programs that you need to have, because we have the same constituents. So it's important that we be there with them as they are doing the things that they do, because we also get the opportunity to take training at their seminars as well, like AB 1234, the sexual harassment training, and I think there's the other some other ones, but all of the trainings that are required by cities are also required by members of special districts. So there is a lot of benefit that we get in addition to being able to speak to mayors and council members on a level playing field there. So I support Director Houston 100%.
And Mr. President,
Go ahead, Director Houston. Oh, well, I think Director Gray wanted to say something. Director
Yeah.
Gray?
go ahead, Director Gray. Yes, sorry.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to support everything that the two directors just said. I just want to reiterate the fact that Southern California Water Coalition certainly is a great advocacy group for the region, especially in terms of messaging. It really supports our policies on water conservation or whatever issues or whatever messaging that we're trying to get out. So I totally support us continuing at that level. Contract cities, I won't repeat everything that's said, but it does include our cities. In our district, we do have cities, and we need to continue to have relationships with those leaders in those cities. And we learn a lot. I mean, they share information when we go to their conferences. They have wonderful workshops. And it's already been said, the value, I think, of both organizations to us. So I totally support moving forward, looking at both of those organizations, supporting them. So thank you.
You're welcome. Director Houston, you had a comment?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to, on one last note, because again, the contract cities thing just changed. I think they did this maybe before pandemic, but they didn't really enforce it. But a caveat is, the Independent Cities Association, see, they do not have a membership. They don't require us to be members in any way, shape, or form, and yet we can go to their conferences as we do. And those are very valuable with the independent cities. But again, unfortunately, contract cities just put this new layer in place. Again, it's very minor. But that does enable us just to even attend. I personally think it's unfortunate that that's their policy, but that's their policy. And so I just, as soon as it was brought to our attention, I've talked to Marcel about it. I've talked to Mark Warnick about it. And I also looked through their website and saw where everyone's at. And to be honest with you guys, Central Basin apparently had already done this at that 2000 level, I think WRD. So, you know, it is what it is. But as the directors also said, it's a great organization to be a part of. And they do more than just those two conferences. You know, they do have other leadership things locally that if any of us want to attend, we're always available to attend those. So anyways, not to belabor the point, but I think that staff did understand everything that needed to be accomplished. And I think Margaret's laid it out well, both on this as well as the those sponsorship numbers. I think everything here is accurate from my recollection. So thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Thank you. Margaret, you're on.
All right, then let's move on to the next slide. And with those changes that we made there, as you know, we do allocate our overhead costs. And because you'll see those numbers on the next few slides, I wanted just to share with you how that allocation worked there. Nothing more than just informational for you. So with that, we'll turn over to the next area that we received some feedback from, which is on our labor and benefits. And with that, you're now on page 13 of your packet. Again, we wanted just to share with you where we were in 21-22, a total with labor and benefits at $9.5 million. We provided some information to you again on February 23rd, $10.4 million. And with the comments that were made by the directors and some additional revisions made by staff, you can see we're just now a little over $10 million or about $457,000 up from the current fiscal year. This does reflect a few items I wanted just to note there. You can see there at the bottom, which is that we are still anticipating to fund the water quality and environmental compliance analysts. There seemed to be some support around that position. Again, we've not only mentioned it here on February 23rd, but also March 9th about the importance of compliance with the permits that we have here. A single drop of water requires us to do these more complex analysis and submissions, if you will, to our various permit holders. Also, too, it does include a merit pool, and again, that merit pool doesn't take into consideration what was the CPI index at 4.3% as at the end of the calendar year. As we know, and just maybe heard, some of you heard yesterday, the inflation rate is at 8.5%. So definitely something that is very much on the minds of everyone at the in the economy, if you will. But certainly we are just including 4.3% in there for merit increases. So with that, you can see that there has been some adjustments, if you will, to each of those items, but I wanted just to share with you how did we get there. So if we can turn to the next slide, which is page 14 in your packet. You'll see that there was comments around the, we had two positions that we were recommending on February 23rd. One was the Executive Manager of External Affairs. That one, there seemed to be some comments there that doesn't seem to be support for that position. Again, as a result of that, we did remove it from the budget. The fiscal impact of that is a savings about $379,000, which does include the benefits. So it's that plus the benefit. In addition to that, we did take a look at our benefit factor that we were using. We had a nice rounded number at 80%. We looked back to what a more precise number could be, which is 78.54%, and that provided us additional savings of $78,000. So that was something that staff is incorporating into the budget, into the labor budget there. So as a result of that, you can see, like I said, that overall labor has gone down by about $208,000. The benefits have gone down by $49,000 for a total of about $457,000 from what we just presented to you back in February. But this is an increase from our fiscal year 21-22, and again, that it reflects the fact that we do have that cost of living increase there and a position. And just to provide you one more slide for context here as it relates to our labor is the following slide, which is on page 15 of your packet. We had shared the slide with you before. We were just updating it there just so that you can see what that position count would look like, where that adjustment is being made. Again, in that operations area, we've now moved that executive manager of external affairs to one of those unbudgeted positions, not necessarily removing it from the org chart, but not necessarily funding it at the executive level. We still have the managers of those each two respected managers that on the org chart, if you see there, but just not the funding for the executive level. And with that, that takes me to the end of my comments regarding the district staffing, labor, and benefits. And with that, I'll pause to see if there's any comments or questions regarding the actions that we've done here.
Apparently not. Very good, Margaret.
Just
Somebody's trying to say something. Who is it?
Director Williams here.
Okay, go ahead, Harold.
I would like to hear the our new general manager's comments on this, and to see whether or not how deeply have you looked into our budget in this area, and would you be making comments at the time before we vote on the budget?
Thank you for that question, Director Williams. And in the short time I've been on board, I have not yet delved deeply into the staffing proposals here. But I think it's prudent, the changes that have been made to reduce staffing costs, looking at not funding the executive manager position. But I am interested in taking a closer look at how we're allocating staff to the variety of functions that we perform and the type of support that we want to move forward with, and coming back with an assessment to this board on a go-forward basis. So that is something that I'll get done prior to the vote for the budget.
Very good, because I'm sure that you're thinking about what you're going to be doing, building your team going forward, and what you need to do that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
All right, thank you. All right, well then let's move on to the next area here, which is on page 16 of your packet, the summary of recycled water operations. So we'll have a few things to talk about here because not only did this budget change because of the changes we made on labor and benefits and also the overhead allocation, but you will see that we did have an increase here in the chemical budget, and I'll talk about a few other items as well. But let me first begin with just going through that far right column there. This is the newest revised budget, if you will. We did present this information to you on March 9th, 2022. You can see we had a budget of $48.5 million. Now it's at $49.7 million. The most significant increase that you see there is in the chemical area. You can see we have a $1.4 million increase there due to proposed unit cost changes that is actually going to be discussed at this afternoon's E&O meeting. Not only are we seeing it in the mini bulk, but also in the processed chemicals. There's been unprecedented, if you will, price increases. And if you will, just even year over year, comparing the budgets, that the chemicals have gone up $4 million just year over year. And on just a unit cost basis, if you will, it's gone up from 300. If you just take the dollars and divide it by the acre feet, you get to 304 for chemicals in 21-22, and now looking at 451. So a fair significant within the chemical budget. But in addition to that, the other comments that we have there is there was some adjustments made, if you will, in our what's the word I'm looking for? In our sale assumptions regarding our irrigation customers. So those changed slightly. So those changed some of the line items there. But for the most part, from the comments that you heard there from the workshop on March 9th, it didn't really change much that was there. There was one comment about the increase on the contracts operations, and we'll get to that on the next slide. But overall, you can see a pretty significant increase there. One other thing I wanted just to make mention of it here, 40.9 $49.7 million is the total recycled water operations budget. And of that, about 27.6% of that is usage driven. So for every acre feet that we sell, we anticipate that we're going to have an additional cost, if you will, and those in the areas of your chemicals, your secondary effluent, your solids management, and your utilities. So again, wanted just to make mention to you, you do see an increase in that budget, but it's mostly because of what we're seeing in the chemical market. And with that, I'll like us to go to the next slide so we can start to address some of the comments and other revisions that we've made to this budget here. So there was an outstanding question regarding the Suez, now Veolia, where if we didn't add any positions, because there is in this proposed budget an addition and on the Suez Veolia side as well, we would then, would labor still go up 6%? And the answer to that is yes. And I've stated here that within the contract, we do have language that we need to follow, which says that it's 2% plus the employment cost index. And so in working with the Suez team, we had noted that the ECI is actually 4.4% for this period of time. They actually ended up using 4% out of the 2%, and that effectively equates to that $600,000 increase that you see here for the contract labor things. The other difference that you see there within the contract operations is that other position, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But the other revisions that we did make here are a few others. Again, we reduced the consultant budget. We were able to see that there's some dollars that we had included in the operations budget. And upon further evaluating them, we found that we could probably capitalize those costs so they no longer become a cost that sits here on this side, but rather on the capital budget side. The other is, again, we adjusted pricing for the chemicals that mentioned that $1.4 million, as well as again, those lower sales for our disinfected tertiary sales or irrigation sales, make some minor changes across a couple line items, that mostly notably within the electricity and chemicals as well. But because this is such a significant budget, I want to take us to the next slide, which is just to review again some of the assumptions that we've used here for this particular budget. So again, we're using the sales assumptions of 32,643. This is lower than the current year at 34,200. We know that our experience has been a lot less because of the Hyperion spill. But as a result of that, we really, felt that in conversations that we shared with you at last week's April 6th workshop, we feel comfortable with these numbers based off of work that's being done at the refineries that might reduce like our Chevron nitrification sales for the second half of the year, or where we anticipate being with the barrier in consultation with both the county and WRD and looking at what we're able to produce. And as I mentioned, this still does, so going to the right side of the slide, these are I'll say the cost side of the assumptions that you will. We do incorporate that 6% increase there, but we also are including a senior SCADA electrical technician. Again, more information was shared at the March 9th meeting about the necessity for that particular position. We also, as I mentioned, are seeing cost increases here on our chemicals. You'll see in the board report, I know there's also something more in the operations update as well. But looking at that board report, saw that basically chemicals are going up 7 to 28% just in this next 6 months period from July through December. So again, we're really feeling some effects there. And again, you'll hear more about that this afternoon in the engineering and operations meeting. Utilities, you see there that this does reflect the fact that we do have higher barrier water demand, and therefore it increases our electricity costs. But it also does consider the board action that was taken just, I believe, on March 29th I think it was March 29th. Maybe it was previous, but direct access program that provides us some stability in our electricity costs for the next few years, 3 years. And also, too, we are having some residual effects from the Hyperion spill, and so we do anticipate from time to time we may need to have the use of potable water. So we've reflected that in our utilities line item as well. And then the solids handling, we did have a request for proposal that's out there that will be brought to the board, I believe, next month in May. But I can share, since the numbers were just received yesterday, that we are seeing a cost increase compared to what we used in the budget, and that will further impact our budget to the tune of about $350,000 to $400,000. And again, I will defer to our operations team to provide you the explanations for that. But I wanted just to let you know that there is a cost impact with that solids handling cost that's there. So again, before we move on to the next budget, a lot of information shared here on the recycled water operations. Happy to see if I can answer anything. If not, I may need to tap into our operations team to help me out. All right, hearing none, I think I'll move on to the next slide. All right, so the next slide here is our technical planning, and again, we provided you the adopted fiscal year 21-22, what we presented to you on March 9th, and then also here's the revised budget. Most notably is that the numbers have remained the same. The projects that we identified to you, those numbers of studies, if you will, from emergency response plan to the interconnection feasibility study to the cost of service study, groundwater augmentation study, those are still there, as well as our partner share with the City of Los Angeles and LA San regarding the MBR project. Those are still there. The only reduction that you see there is because of the allocation of labor, benefits, and overhead. That has what resulted in a reduction in this particular budget. And if I can take your attention to the next slide there, you can see that we had one outstanding question from the workshop, which was, could you provide me the specific act regarding the requirement around the district's emergency response plan. And so I've shared with you the information that regarding the emergency response plan. First of all, we do have staff time that is allocated there, and we do have a little bit of consultant dollars of $75,000, but the explanation that you see down below is the explanation received by operations as to the why we see that it's necessary for us to update that particular report based off of conversations and what the act says. And while it does not necessarily reply to us as it does for wastewater and drinking water, through a conversation back in 2019, they did suggest that we should consider it as well. And that's why we have it in this year's budget. And the link that you see there is that link to that particular act. And again, I'll pause to see if there's any comments or questions regarding technical planning budget before I move on to the next one.
Apparently there are none.
All right.
All
right,
Oh, there's somebody.
I'll raise a question. This was the
Desi,
one that
go ahead.
Excuse me,
I think
Mr.
Desi,
Chair.
uh,
And I
yes.
know he does, but I just want to remind him that I cannot hear him. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now,
With respect to this item, I see that recognizes that we are not required to have a plan prepared, but that it was at the inquiry made of the regional board that they came back and said it wouldn't be a bad idea. That was in 2019. As the regional board, without us asking, I'm not saying that we should go ask, without us asking, has the regional board followed up? Has the regional board sent any letters? Has the regional board done any other inquiries as to the status of this?
And I see Uzi's online, so I'll let her address that question.
Great, thank you. They have not followed up. What has typically happened, like at Central Basin, is you actually suddenly get a letter from the EPA. So we were trying to get ahead of that. Hopefully we won't, but that was our intent of just strengthening our own program, following the guidelines, and being prepared, because when they do send out the letters, it's a pretty tight turnaround within 6 months.
So you keep using the Central Basin as an example. How many other examples can you give me of where this is being required?
all drinking water and wastewater agencies have been required. Most have turned them in. I was just at AWWA. A lot of them, there was a deadline to meet. We are unique as the recycled water agency. As you know, Director, we always fall in between that drinking water, wastewater. Sometimes frustratingly so, because the regulators throw whichever regulation is more stringent at us. And that's what's made it a little bit more complex. That's why we tend to use Central Basin in this example, because they follow that same kind of line of reasoning. But all of the drinking water and wastewater agencies that I have spoken to, they have met the requirements, but they were required to by a specific deadline.
My position hasn't changed. I'm not convinced by your arguments that this is required. And when I read the same act as you're reading, I don't see that requirement. And pretty much in your response here, it does say that we do fall outside of that requirement. So why would we want to spend this kind of money and undertake this when it's not a requirement, not necessary? Is not something I'll be very supportive of. Thank you.
Question.
Go ahead, Harold.
Thank you. Outside of the $75,000 cost as a insurance policy, I guess, what is the downside of doing this?
There would be, I guess I should say, no downside. I guess we could argue being prepared for emergencies is something that's very important. So I think the upside is we would be following the guidelines of all other agencies kind of as a best management practice. If you ask me the downside, I would actually see it as an opportunity. It might expose some things for us, but I see that as an opportunity to then make that improvement, almost like an audit.
Thank you.
And this is Board Member Houston real fast.
Go ahead, Scott.
You know, I don't know all the details. I don't know all the weeds in it. But in my opinion, first of all, I don't think it's a lot of dollars, number one. But number two, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I do think the future emergency response is very important. I've talked about that back in the past years ago. Just when we think about our own facility, when we think about the nature of, cybersecurity, which of course is getting a lot of interest now in the public sector. So I know where the people tell us, well, you're recycled water, it's not as important. I think it's important for all of us. But last but not least, if we're thinking about the future of direct potable reuse, it's probably a good idea that we do move forward with this and make sure we're ahead of the game in some sort of compliance, just as we prepare. So I personally would not like to see this removed from the budget. I definitely understand where Director Alvarez is coming from and making that argument, but on the other side of the coin, from my perspective, I think this is money well spent.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any other comments? If not, let's press on. Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next slide, which is page 21 of your packet. And now we have the public information education. This information was shared with you on March 10th, and you can see we have a budget of about $4.5 million. Again, through the conversations, there was no adjustments necessarily to any of the program costs. There was a comment that we'll see on the next page that I will address. But with the revisions, again, with the labor, benefits, and overhead, you do see that budget has now moved down to 4.469. So again, a $38,000 decrease there, just slightly up from our current budget of fiscal year 21-22. And with that, I'll go to the next page, which was the outstanding question that we had there. There was a comment made about water harvest and how are we engaging, if you will, with sponsors to help us offset these costs. So already included in the budget is $30,000 for sponsorships that we've included in our other revenues. Again, you have not seen those other revenues, but staff has incorporated that in there. I will also say, anecdotally, we are planning is already underway to start sending out those letters once we have some more concrete information about when the event is and start planning forward with that. But we do have our list of sponsors we're ready to reach out to. We've got the draft letter ready to go. So we're ready to reach out to those sponsors, potential sponsors, let me put it that way, when we are ready to move forward. And with that, that takes me through my comments for the public information and education.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then let's move on to the next slide, which is our water policy and resources development. Again, we shared with you this information with you on March 16th. You can see we had a budget of $2.1 million. And after, again, the revisions with just the district labor benefits and overhead, you can see that now we're at $2,084,000. Again, a $19,000 increase, no changes to our direct costs. This still allows us to continue on with our consultants that we use for our federal and state advocacy, as well as our water bottle filling station. And so we see a revised number, like I said, of $2,084,627. And that is a slight decrease from the current budget 21-22. And then moving on to the next page, we did have comments that were made at that particular workshop. However, there were no outstanding items there. And so there was nothing to follow up here at this time. And with that, I can then move on to the next slide, unless there's any comments on the water policy and resources development budget.
Guess not.
All right. Finally, to our water use and efficiency and conservation program. Again, we shared this information with you on March 10th. Again, providing you a number of $2.6 million as our proposed budget for 22-23, slightly up from 21-22. But those numbers have now been revised down again, only because of the district labor benefits and overhead. And there was no changes, if you will, to the direct costs. So you saw an overall decrease in this particular budget of about $34,000 because of those changes in allocations. But there was one comment that was made there, and that is on the next slide, page 26 of your packet. And that had to do with our discussion around the rain barrel distributions. As we shared with you, the rain barrel distributions as presented in the budget, and it still is maintained in the budget, is that we are doing a hybrid approach, meaning we're going to do 2 in-person events, and then going to do this home delivery for the balance, if you will, for the costs that were there. That being said, the directors asked, how do we get to all 5 there? What would, be the plan to be able to get there, a proposal? And so that information, it has been prepared and will be shared with you at your April 14th Public Information and Education Committee, where it tells you sort of what it looks like for doing 5 in-person events. Overall, you can see that there's a $31,000 impact should we move to that direction, if you will. But at this time, the staff has still kept a hybrid approach in here until that discussion is had. And then we can then incorporate that change if a change is requested. And with that, I'll take a pause to see if you have any comments or questions on this particular budget. Hearing
Guess
none,
not.
then I'll go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead. I just said there were none.
Okay, thank you. All right, then let's move on to the next slide, which is page 27 of your packet. We wanted just to share with you our current debt portfolio. Certainly, and when you think about your operating expenses, a debt is certainly a component of it. This shows you what our debt schedule looks like from fiscal year 23 all the way out to our debt that you see outstanding. You can see for the table in the upper right-hand corner, we do have 3 series outstanding at the par values that you see there. Outstanding power value, I should say, that you see there. $195 million is our outstanding balance as of today. Also noted there, you can see the final maturity as well as the call date. And those call dates are important for us to see where we may have future refunding opportunities. As happened just in February of this year, we were able to refund our 2012 bonds, and we were able to refund them with savings. And you can see that that's reflected there. We were also able to refund some additional bonds in 2021 and also had some additional savings. So those all have been incorporated into this debt schedule that you see here. But again, the next opportunities for us to be able to refund are not until 2026 and 2031. Typically, when we put these bonds out there and they're long in nature, there usually is a 10-year call date, and this is, if you can see there, reflects a 10-year call date. And with that, I wanted just to turn your attention to sort of that spot, that white space that you see there. Fiscal year 22-23, our debt service is anticipated to be $21.2 million, and that reflects our fixed, the debt service that you see for these three issuances. And with that, I will see if you have any questions on our debt portfolio before I move on. And we will have more of discussion around our debt when we get to our long-range financial planning, so that you can kind of see how does this debt get paid over this lifetime, if you will. So with that, I'm happy to move on to the next slide, which is page 28 of your packet. On page 28, here is our proposed 5-year capital expenditures. As I mentioned to you, this will be the focus of the presentation scheduled for next week on April 20th, scheduled for 1 p.m. So different than the 10 a.m. time slots that we've been doing, we've got the 1 p.m. Time slot for this particular budget. We've broken it out across, of course, 5 different years so that you can see what those costs are, but also into sort of different categories, if you will. So the first category being the new infrastructure treatment asset. So most notably in that project you see there is the phase 2 project that is currently underway. This is the one which is being done over at our Carson facility. Moving to the next column, the new infrastructure customer pipelines and laterals, you can see that over the 5-year period of time, $12.8 million are being anticipated to be spent there. The large majority of that cost there is for the PV lateral. As you are aware that back on March 29th, the board did approve a couple of very important documents for us. One was that partnership agreement between the PV Golf Course as well as Cal Water for their contributions towards this project. But we were also provided notification about the State Water Resources Control Board through both a low interest loan of $3.9 million at 0.55%, as well as a $2.1 million grant. But we also secured much earlier on another through Prop 84, another a little over $2 million grant towards that PV lateral project. So again, from that $12.9 million, a fair amount of it being covered through our customers and through low interest loans. Moving over to the R&R component, you can see there $121 million over the 5 years. This is where the biggest dollars are being spent, if you will, in our next 5 years. And so certainly that conversation next week will be very important for you to understand the nature of what those projects are. Where are they required for us to be able to maintain sort of our fiscal integrity of those assets from a safety compliance perspective, or what are we contractually required to maintain? And we'll talk about that a little bit again next week. And then the other projects, the 1.2 and the 508, I'm sorry, the 1.7 is other projects. Most notably in that area is our IT projects, as well as there are some dollars associated to the district headquarters here at the DLD building that should we, I know we are considering moving locations, but there are certain projects here that may need to occur for safety and health reasons. And so we've incorporated them there, but again, more of that conversation will be held next week. So overall, you can see for the fiscal year 22-23, $57.9 million to be spent. But over the 5-year, you can see $157 million is anticipated. And with that, let me make one more point on this slide, which is you see that footnote at the bottom, which is that there is additional $73 million worth of future anticipated projects. And again, more of that will be discussed next week, but I wanted just to share with you that these are projects that are in the initial planning. These are ones that we're waiting on customers on sort of where they anticipate to be. or our partners that would be into that particular place. None of those costs are actually included in the fiscal year 22, 23. Some costs start to happen in 23, 24, and then certainly build up in the later years like 24, 25. And so those costs, we wanted you to be aware of them, but certainly from when we were thinking it from a financing perspective, we were thinking about this 5-year number of 157,000, or I'm sorry, $157 million. And with that, I wanted just to take you to the next slide, just to kind of share with you sort of how we're going to pay for this. So I tried to share with you in 3 different columns sort of what it is, so that you can kind of understand sort of some of the numbers that are here and things that you'll need to consider as we take a look at our rate considerations, not just for fiscal year 22, 23, but also into the future, where do we anticipate being. So again, for fiscal year 22, 23, $57.9 million is there. We've identified, we were able to break down sort of when we anticipate receiving some of those fundings in different times. So you can see external funding grants, we anticipate getting about $9.8 million in grants. I will just highlight right now, from the purposes of putting our revenues and expenses together, until those sort of projects, we have more certainty about sort of the timing of that, when that dollars will be earned. I don't typically include capital grants that's there, so I wanted just to note that number real quick. So circle it, we'll come back to it, but I wanted you to be aware of it. On the external funding from our customers, those are, again, coming from not only our refineries, which are already included in our 5-year forecast, but also those funding that we anticipate getting, like I said, from PV Gulf Course or the Cal Water towards not only the PV lateral project, but also they are also contributing to our Carson Phase 2 project as well. The state loans that you see there is both for the PV lateral as well as the Carson Phase 2. So we have a low interest loan on both of those. And so you can see sort of over that period of time, some of it's being recognized and will be, recognizing as that we're using debt to pay for it, that's there. And then some of it will, be the dollars that are matching up to the expenditures that are happening this period of time, and then, to what the overall total is. And then the balance is, this is where district comes in. Again, some of those decisions may come, change in the future. If we are fortunate enough to receive future grants, that will certainly lessen the burden, if you will, to the district here, or if we have customers that come in and want to contribute towards these projects. But for now, in order to sort of balance out the numbers, these are the numbers that we will need to focus in on, which is about $29 million of projects that need to be somehow paid for by the district. So I've identified PAYGO or financing. Again, that discussion we can have at next week and the following week's meeting about how do we solve that equation. But I also wanted to share with you, what does that 5-year number look like, so you can tie into that number on the previous slide, but also make you aware of the fact that these projects that you will hear about next week, as the engineering calls it, the Table 1 schedule. That Table 1 schedule, overall, it's about $214 million of projects. Now, we have already spent about $31 million towards those projects, or anticipate spending that towards by June of this year. And there are some future anticipated costs of about $26 million there. So that's how you get to that, from that 157 to that $214 million, by adding the previous and that sort of beyond that 5-year period of time, you get to that $214 million. But I thought it was important for you to see sort of what your universe is, so that you're not sort of surprised by it by, a month or two from now or a year from now. And with that, I'll take a pause there. I know there's a lot there, but I will say that a lot of this discussion about the specifics about the projects and about the how we're going to fund them, certainly I anticipate that that'll be much part of the equation, if you will, for our conversation, if you will, for next week and the following week, when we have 2 more additional workshops just to kind of work through all these numbers. One last thing I wanted to point out here before, again, another few numbers I just wanted to circle for you. So one is that the $29 million, I want you to be mindful of that particular number when we get to sort of our rate scenarios and what does that mean, and when we put all our revenues and expenses together, what is our net PAYGO that we're receiving. and what that number is, so you can see how should we move going forward. But the other thing I wanted just to make sure that you're aware of is that second bullet point there. In those projects, there are projects that are these are future projects that are either active or are soon to be we're ready to engage on, but we are already collecting funds, if you will, from our refinery agreements for them. So we have determined that to be around $15.6 million of monies towards those active or future capital projects that we anticipate that, if we do not move forward with those projects, these are fundings that we would have to give back to the refineries because we did not meet that aspect of that agreement that we would said that we would collect these monies for those projects. But in addition to that, there's about $6.2 million of projects that we have already completed. And if you will, they were some dollars that we use our commercial paper for that we are actually collecting on money from that it goes, if you will, to pay for that debt service. So that $21.2 million, some of those dollars is coming from that 6.2. Now, again, these are cumulative numbers, not an annual number, but I wanted to provide that context for you as well. All right, well then, if I hear no more questions here, let's move over to the revenue side of the shop. This is some new information for you. So again, happy to go through at your pace to make sure that you understand what we're recommending here. Again, no action is being requested from you today. We want to receive your input. Again, we will go through a couple more workshops. We hope to provide you sort of here is all together the nice sort of pretty budget document, and then the consideration of all of this will take place in June. So let's begin.
Margaret, before we start, President Deere, I believe we have a question from Director Alvarez.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Director Alvarez.
Thank you.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of details behind these numbers, and I'm assuming that we're going to get this next week. Is that the idea?
Correct. Yes, so I know engineering is working fast and furious to make sure they get that information out for you. I think the goal is to get out to you by the end of this week. And if we need a little extra time, because again, we're trying to get Greg up to speed on all these projects. So we hope to by Friday, if not by Monday morning, we will certainly have all this information for next week's Wednesday workshop.
And my direction was by no later than Monday morning to have those in your queue.
I appreciate that. With respect then to the pay-go financing, which is right now, I guess, a lot together, are you going to break that out? Or do you have a breakout of that now?
We do, but I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Not today, but something that you can give us after this meeting.
Yes, we do have a breakdown there. Again, I think there is, I know we've had discussions about, is this something that you finance or is this something you do based off of PAYGO? We have sort of I've shared with you sort of an internal philosophy of how some of these would be using PAYGO dollars and some of those sort of longer in nature, meaning longer useful life in nature projects that you would see that are, benefit the multiple generations, if you will, that those would be, we would consider perhaps debt financing there. So there is a breakdown there. I would say it's probably about 50-50, if you will. 50% is towards PAYGO and 50% is towards debt financing. But again, until we have those conversations about, do we need these projects? Do we need these projects now? And understanding sort of what is our fiscal forecast, if you will. I've wanted just to share them and combined for you, but we do have those numbers there. And again, it's about a 50-50 split.
Okay, maybe you can get those to me after the meeting, please.
Will do.
To all of us, of course.
Yeah,
Yes.
you got to remember that.
We can certainly share that out as the information is shared with you on the capital budget presentation for next week. All right.
Okay.
If we're ready to move on, then let's move over to operating revenues and let's go to page 31 of your packets. So again, this slide you've already seen here, but I just wanted to notate that again, at the request of one of our directors, they asked us to provide a sensitivity analysis around a 5% reduction on our imported water retail sales. And so we just wanted to note here that these are the sales that are in their fiscal year 22-23 budget, 109,900 for imported water sales and 32,643 for our recycled water sales. And again, I just wanted to remind you of those potential impacts to our demands for a variety of reasons. And again, as we continue on, not just in this year, but as we continue on in our dialogue about the drought and about the mandatory requirements and about MET and all those and our own projects, certainly these will be first and foremost in our mind as we make those water sales assumptions. But we did want to let you know that we are going to show you sensitivity around a 5% reduction on our potable retail sales. So with that, let me turn you over to the next slide. And just to orient you one more time as it relates to our rates and charges components. So first of all, we have our West Basin imported Tier 1 commodity rate. That is our rate that is based off of a per acre foot basis. And that individual rate is actually made up of 3 components. One of them being our own, which we refer to as the reliability service charge. So if I say RSC, I mean reliability service charge. That rate changes on a fiscal year basis, July 1, 2022. Then we have 2 other components that are passed through from Metropolitan Water District. One of them is their own Tier 1 rate, and those rates are changed on a calendar year basis. So it makes it fun for us to have 6 months at one rate and 6 months at another rate, but we make it work. January 1, 2023 is when those rate increases are anticipated to incur. On the readiness to serve charge as part of the MET's overall review of its rates and charges, they do provide us a number of what is our share, proportionate share, if you will, of that particular thing. So we know a cost that's will be provided to us, but we actually collect it on a variable basis, meaning like it's on a per acre foot basis. So we take that fixed cost, convert it, and that you can see also will change on January 1, 2023. In addition to the variable side, there's also the fixed charges, and there are 2 fixed charges. One is the West Basin fixed service charge, again, changing on July 1, 2022, and the MET capacity charge, also a pass through, and again, we will match up, if you will, so revenues and expenses get to as near zero as we can, and we'll show you a worksheet on that. That will also change on January 1, 2023. So with that as a sort of a background, if you will, on what our rates and charges are, let's now move over to slide 33. And, slide 33. Thank you so much. So if on this page is a nice clean page, but on my page is a lot of little extra notes because of the board action taken yesterday by Metropolitan Water District. Up until about Monday, when they were saying here's the number of options that we have 3. Here's our staff recommendation, which is option 1. That reflected an 8% increase overall to its revenues from calendar year 23 as well as calendar year 24. So we shared those numbers here for you. But through the discussions by the board, and I know from a late night effort by the MWD staff, they were able to come up with an option 4 and presented that to the MWD board yesterday. And that was considered by the board. And if I remember correctly, looking at this tiny little screen, it looked like it was a unanimous vote for those that were present to move to a 5% increase, meaning 5% increase overall on its rates and charges January 1, 2023, and another 5% January 1, 2024. Now, depending upon your mix of if you're treated, if you're untreated, if you're Tier 1, you're Tier 2, those numbers may vary slightly. But overall, to the Metropolitan family, it is a 5%. And so, again, we will be updating our numbers to reflect that. But just so that you can make notes on your own slide here, January 1, 2023, we showed as 1246. It was actually 1209 that was approved by the Metropolitan Water District Board yesterday. That was a $66 increase versus the 103 that they originally were showing. Overall, that actually is a 5.77% increase. So not 5%, but that particular component, if you will, changed to by 5.77%. And just for reference for you, for January 1, 2024, that number is actually now 1256 that was adopted. And again, those are, so overall, you can see that it did have an impact, if you will, to MET, and we will, again, feed that through our revenue model to reflect that as well. So let's move on to the next slide, which is, again, the RTS. I've already mentioned to you that it's a charge that we get on a fixed basis, but then because we wanted to collect it and show that value, if you will, to our customers of what that cost represents, as opposed to finding it somewhere else on a property tax bill, we decided to collect it ourselves on our rates. So we base it off of the same thing, a 10-year rolling average. We are provided it based off of a 10-year rolling average as our proportionate share. And again, we then look to apply that on our tier 1 rate. So the calculation is shown on the next page, which is page 35 of your packet. And here is sort of the side-by-side calendar to calendar comparison here. So first of all, I just wanted to share today, they are collecting $140 million for their calculation, for their RTS component. And that our proportionate share was 7.82%. Now, when you take that 140 million and you take that 7.82%, you get to, and you look to what our sales are, you see, I'm sorry, not the sales yet. You can see that the $5.4 million is what we owe for the first half of this year. But then the second half of the year, we see that MET is going to be increasing that number. And so the number was 157, is now moved to $154 million that they're collecting. Again, instead of the increase that is shown there, it is now a 10% increase year over year for their collection on the RTS. Our own allocation is at 8.01%. So looking again at that 10-year rolling average and how we compare to others, we will pay 8% of that proportionate share of that $157 million. And you can see that the sum of those two numbers get you to that $11,676,150. Now that number has changed, of course, with their change of the 157 down to 154. And what I will tell you is that instead of taking that number and dividing it by 106, you can see that instead of the $100 that we're now collecting, and we were anticipating to go to 123 when it was that $157 million. Sorry, so many numbers. It actually will change to $121. Again, we're just trying to collect what it is that we need to collect to pay that $11.7 million commitment to Metropolitan Water District. So instead of that 123, we will show a number of 121 for the MET RTS collection portion of this component. So again, a lot of numbers being shown at you. The end result is 123 becomes 121. And then on to the next slide, which is the third component that's there. And I will just share, we're sharing you the history that's here. And we will have some sensitivity analysis there on the RSC, as I mentioned, a 0% and a 5%, just so you know what.
Actually, I'm gonna call Uber to take us there because I want to.
A 0% and a 5%. A 5% basically is a $12 increase on our RSC. I wanted just to show you some numbers that are there. We will talk about that in a moment. Don't have a recommendation, just wanted just to provide you some context, if you will, so that we can have some dialogue around that. So with that, I'll move over to the fixed charges. But again, one is the MWD charge. So the MWG charge, again, on page 37 of your packet. Next slide. Thank you. Again, this is a pass-through charge. It's based off of that peaking, that summer peaking charge. And again, we are able to provide a reduction on the rate that we receive from Metropolitan Water District, because when we peak and when we, as a collective West Basin, and when our individual customers peak, there's differences there. And so as a result of that, we are able to change that number there. But I also wanted just to note to you here that there are updated numbers here as well. So if you go into that West Basin paid column and you see that bold number there under January 1, 2023, you see 10,800 per CFS. That is now reduced down to 10,600. So again, we will see ourselves with a lower number there, but what does that mean for West Basin when we go across the page to that proposed rate? No longer do you see a 9305. What we will be recommending going forward to make sure that we offset the costs to us is 9,135 per CFS. So again, trying to pass through those costs there, but so the numbers are slightly different, but in the end, we're trying not to make a dollar here. We're just trying to pass it through. And then to our next slide here, which is our last component, if you will, which is our West Basin fixed service charge. This was something that began implementation in 1819. While we were transitioning, by increasing, if you will, our fixed service charge, our reliability service charge remained flat. And we look at a 3-year rolling average of our shares, and we'll show that information and how we get to those numbers, if you will, on the next few slides. For us here, we looked at the basis of how we would want to collect this. We could be a percentage, it could be based off of other factors. We looked at a couple different programs that remain relatively stable in nature. You can see here in fiscal year 22-23, some of those two budgets is about $6.5 million. Around the same $6.5 million that we had last year. And so the equivalent, if you will, is still around that $62 there. Again, we don't collect it on a per acre foot basis. We're collecting in a fixed amount, but I wanted just to give you that equivalent so that you're aware of it. With the proposed recommendation here, we would, to the allocation changes that you would see for each customer, that would be effective July 1, 2022. So if we can go to the next couple slides, I just wanted to walk through that calculation, then I'll take a pause on all the rates and charges to see if there's any comments. So the first page here, page 39 of your packet, and what is shown on screen. Again, this is a 3-year rolling average. What has our customers done over the last 3 years, completed fiscal years? So 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, what are those averages? And based off of those averages, you can see that last column there, 3-year average. And then what we do, taking those numbers, so we take the 1,375 over the 110, so 110,000, and we come up with a percentage. So if we can go to the next slide, and we did that for each customer, you can see that far right column there, you can see that percentage now is 1.25. So Cal American Water Company, based off of their 3-year rolling average, their percentage is 1.25. And therefore their charge will be $81,791, and that's the annual charge. We do when we do bill it on a monthly basis, but this is the annual charge there. So you can see sort of by customer, some go up, some go down, and it just depends on sort of where their 3-year rolling average was compared to the others. Some may move to, into a place where there's some savings for them, and some move to a place where they might be paying slightly more. But overall, you can see that there are small changes, not big changes, as it relates to our fixed service charge. And that would be what we would move forward with, is that column which says fiscal year 22-23 proposed annual charge. That would be what would be in our rate resolution should the board consider those numbers there. And before we move on to our recycled water sales, I want to just take a pause. Again, a lot of information shared in front of you. Want to make sure that if you have any questions or have any comments, I wanted to make sure I hear from them now before we move into recycled water rates and charges. Hearing none, then I will move on to the next page, which is page 41 of your page packet, which is our proposed recycled water rates that's here. Now we have a number of rates. Some of these rates are from a published schedule, and that's the schedule that you see here. And then some that you will see on the next page are based off of agreements that we have with our refineries or with the water replenishment district. So I want to talk to you on each of those items. So for our inside service area and outside service area, first let me comment on inside service area. It does include all of our disinfected tertiary clients, as well as Chevron nitrified, based off of the agreement that was done in the mid-90s or something like that. It was based off of a tiered rate structure. So The rate for the Chevron nitrified sales are at the same levels, if you will, as our tiered, as our disinfected tertiary. You can see that it's going to, we're proposing to go from 1,294 up to 1,520. That is a big increase. We understand that, but if you recall back to the recycled water operations page, I had shared with you that sort of table up in the upper right-hand corner, which is what is the unit cost that's there. And it had gone from 1,100 actual to a 1,200 budget for this year. We don't know what our actual is at this time for the full fiscal year, but then moving up to $1,500 in fiscal year 22-23, and I probably will go up even higher with that new number with the sludge. That being said, you can see that our unit cost has gone up about $300, and so we're trying to make capture, if you will, those cost increases here. That's reflected there. So that's what you see there is about a $226 increase reflected for our recycled water customers. Now, for our outside service area, just to note who's in that category, those again are those customers that are within LADWP as well as the City of Torrance. And with the City of Torrance, it's also includes, I should clarify, the Torrance Torrance boiler feed. The Torrance nitrified is actually set by an agreement now, and so their calculation is different. But again, they have the same similar $226 increase there, but again, on a tiered rate structure. So let's then move on to slide 42 of your packet, which is your recycled water agreements. These are our rates and charges. And again, a lot of information on this page here, so I'll share with it, but please let me know if you need me to clarify any items that are here. So as I will walk through each line item just to kind of clarify with you sort of what we're receiving and just make you aware of some of those, that agreement termination date. So under Chevron nitrified, that is under a separate agreement. And again, as I mentioned, that the sales that you see there are on a tiered rate structure. We do receive a capital fixed payment from them of about $1 million a year. And we have that agreement until August 31st, 2024. On the low pressure boiler feed and the high pressure boiler feed, we entered into a new agreement. I believe it actually got signed, I think, until in I think 2020, but it was one in which that it actually it goes back to 2016. There were some delays between the parties there, but nonetheless, we do have an agreement in place that takes us to 2027, September 2027. We do receive capital fixed payments of about $2.2 million. The difference with this $2.2 million is that these are current and future projects that are there. So again, going back to that other slide when I was referring to how are we paying for these projects, capital projects. Again, we are collecting funding for projects based off of this agreement here. The rates that are calculated here are calculated based off of a 3-year rolling average for our actual unit cost. So because we know our unit cost for 21, we know our unit cost for 20 and 19, we take the average of that unit cost for Chevron boiler feed, and that's then determines what that calculation is. So the cost increases that we're seeing from the Hyperion effect this year, as well as then what we're proposing in the fiscal year 22-23. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see those rate increases until a year or two from now because of the fact of this 3-year rolling average off of actual unit cost. But we will be seeing them. Unfortunately, we're just not going to see them this year. With the Marathon agreement, we have one agreement with them that covers both the nitrified and the low pressure boiler feed. This rate here states that our rate is based off of that the cumulative increase on the refineries rates, if you will, cannot be higher than the cumulative rate increases that you see on your potable side, so that tier 1 rate. So we're making sure that we're matching up that's there. And a year over year, you could be different, but on a cumulative basis, you need to be in line, if you will, what those rate increases are. With our increase coming up in our contract coming up in January 2025, we wanted to be very mindful of that and making sure that those rates do equal to that increase that you saw over the lifetime of that agreement. Under the Torrance nitrified, we have two separate agreements there. Nitrified, as I mentioned, is the most recent one that we have done. That one there also is on a 3-year rolling average of actual unit cost to determine their commodity rate. And that $1.3 million there is for some defined projects that are in our CIP budget that either have been completed or, like I said, are future projects. And therefore, we are collecting funds on those. You can see that agreement comes up in August 2023. And we also have a separate agreement on the boiler feed. That boiler feed is on a tiered rate structure for the commodity rate. And again, we received two fixed payments from them. One is as it relates to the capital projects. So we received about $1.5 million there for, projects that we built, back when this was originally constructed. But we also received about another $1 million that is sort of an O&M reimbursement, and that is reflected here as well. Again, this also expires August 2023. So we will be, working with the refinery on beginning to negotiate that agreement and bring that before the board over this next year. And then finally, the last of our agreements that we have out there where this rate is set is the Water Replenishment District, where our barrier rate, there is a very defined calculation there that's based off of what the RA is doing, what the pumping is, and then there's also a look of about a ramp up that's there. Pretty complex calculation, but our team works with the WR team to come to an agreement on what that rate is. And you can see that based off of that calculation, that rate is going up to $1,174. On this particular agreement, we do not receive any annual capital fixed payments. And so all that we do receive from WRD is just the commodity rate. That agreement expires on March 31st, 2037. So again, a lot of information there, but wanted just to provide you that context so that you're understanding all of these numbers as shown here have been incorporated into our revenues assumptions for fiscal year 22-23. So I'll take a pause here to see if there's any comments or questions.
This is Director Houston, really quick. If I may, Mr. President.
Sure, go ahead.
No, just real quick, Margaret. The only question I did have, because I know how we articulate to our purveyors, with our customer agency workshops and such, but how do you all articulate ahead of time to the customers with the recycled water these upcoming adjustments that are on the table?
Absolutely. So actually, we have a customer agency workshop scheduled for April 28th. I've sent out the invitation to all the customer agencies, including not just our imported water or water purveyors, but also our refinery customers as well. So everybody will be informed of that information. Many of them are aware of, the fact that, if we have a calculation, sort of what it is, and we are, meet with them periodically just to talk about sort of, what's going on just in general about the projects, but also about sort of any other considerations that they have. So they will be, or like I said, they have been invited to the April 28th workshop, but we will also be, discussing it with them there separately.
Sure, good. I guess that was my point, and I was sure that you could probably all do that, but you guys keep in touch with them because they're obviously in a little bit of a different world when it comes to recycled water versus the potable. And I know that obviously a number of them are getting both, but just wanted to hear how you guys articulate that to them. So yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. One other caveat I just wanted to make mention of here, because of the recent change by Metropolitan Water District lowering their 8% down to the 5%. When we originally put these numbers together for Marathon, those numbers were assuming the 8%. Of course, that's now 5%, so that actually we can't go up as high as we would be able to go up on the Marathon, and so that number will adjust down. So the number, Lisa, as calculated last night, the nitrified will be 1307 versus the 1346. And the low pressure boiler feed will be at 1555 versus the 1594. All right. Well, we only have a few more slides on the other revenues, and then we get into our sensitivity analysis. So let's get on to that next page, which is page 43 of your packet. a small number here, but I also just wanted to, make sure that your information is available to you. We do have an agreement with Metropolitan Water District for our LRP, or Local Resources Program, for their incentive. This agreement does expire in 2037, but for those customers, NRG, West Coast barrier sales, when they exceed 12,555, again, our barrier sales are less than that, so we're not anticipating to get any LRP right now. And if there are any customers that are along these laterals, those also could receive an LRP incentive. But based off of the sales that we have right now, only energy at the rate of $250 gives us about $7,500. So just wanted to make sure you're aware that we are aware of that particular revenue. We will take that $7,500 and move forward. So with that, I wanted just to now take you to the next slide, which is page 44 of your packet. The standby charge. This certainly has been a constant for us for a number of years. As you can see, historically, we have collected about $10 million. But in 2017, there was a class action suit against us regarding this, and a settlement agreement was entered into in October 2020. Finally, in April 1st, 2022, the judge finally did approve that settlement agreement. There are still details being worked out about sort of the payments that need to happen and how that it gets incorporated. You will see information about the standby charge at next week's Finance and Administration Committee about our annual sort of notice of intent. We still need to follow that process regardless of what the court says. So you'll see that start next week. But based off of those percentages that were agreed in that settlement agreement, and based off of those parcels that we were informed by our consultant that works with us on this particular things, we anticipate having our standby charge levy about $7 million in fiscal year 22-23. It goes down in 23-24 to about $6 million. It further goes down in 24-25 to $5.7 million. Then it goes up to $7.7 million and stays at $7.7 million until it ends in 2030. So there's an 8-year period of time in which we have the standby monies. And so certainly as we are looking at that overall 5-year forecast, that long-range financial planning workshop that we will have on April 27th, these certainly will be are included and will be shared with you on the overall picture for the district here. So $7 million of those amounts are being reflected there. And then finally, to the last slide here on page of the revenue section, page 45, just two other items to note there. Again, we have our cash and investment portfolio, and based off of current market conditions, although that being said, we'll see how the Fed's increases rate over this next year to battle this sort of inflation and other considerations. But we do show about $1 million of interest earnings. And on our water use efficiencies, again, as shared with you at our workshop on March 10th, there was a couple of projects there where we do anticipate using Metropolitan member agency incentives. And so that is an amount about $215,000. But I also wanted to share with you, there are 2 pending grants. We are starting to hear notification on that second one, that DWR. We don't have the final details yet, but we understand that we are going to be awarded some funding there, and we're still waiting to hear on the USBR. And so with that, that takes us to the end of the revenue section. And before we go into our sensitivity analysis, I'll again pause to see if there's any other comments on our revenue section before we move on.
Apparently no comments. Continue your good work.
All right, thank you so much. All right, let's talk about rate consideration. So let's go to page 47 of your packet. Again, these numbers have all changed from the time I posted it to the time till today, but that's okay. We'll go through it. As I mentioned here, the practice of West Basin has been to pass through MWD rates and charges. Again, the board was considering them on April 12th. They did consider it, so those numbers are now known, but they're different than what is shown on this page here. Again, so what those numbers are is, again, a commodity rate of, instead of 1246, 1209. If you're looking at your RTS, our overall collections go from 140 to 157. So their overall instead of 157, I should say it's 154, an overall increase of 10% on that charge. And on the capacity charge, it is a decrease from 12,200 with a new number of now 10,600, or a 13% decrease. So again, all of those numbers, while not reflected on this presentation today, are already reflected in our 5-year schedule. We will again be updating those numbers and sharing that with you again on the 27th. But down to the bottom end side of the page here, again, we went through the calculation of how the fixed service charge is there. It remains relatively flat. Again, some customers are up, some customers are down, but relatively same number. And again, as I already highlighted, there are 2 considerations as far as our RSC. One is a no change in our RSC. Again, some of the reasons for that were we wanted to be considerate of the fact that we were seeing an 8% from MWD. Could we, bear any of that burden, if you will, ourselves by not having a rate increase on ourselves? But also, but wanted just to share with you, by doing a no rate increase on our reliability service charge, that does reduce funding for our PAYGO for our CIP projects. Again, the net revenues that we get, the money that we earn, if you will, is money that we reinvest in back into ourselves. So if it's not going to be from, PAYGO, is it going to be from financing? Sure, maybe some of it come from reserves, but again, we're going to have that dialogue with the board to understand how we're moving forward, not just in the 1 year, but for the long-term fiscal forecast. And that's why that 5-year capital discussion next week will be so important. But on the 5% change and increase, again, the reasons why we would consider a 5% is one, providing some additional funding for that PAYGO funding. It increases it slightly, an increase of about $1.4 million. It does consider rate management over a time. So it's, it's again, being mindful of the present, but also trying to make sure that we're not in a position where we're having to be in a position where we have to raise rates. And so, could we do something that's there? And then really just considering the current inflation. Again, at the time that I wrote this, it was 7%. Yesterday, again, I read that it's at 8.5%, the highest in 40 years that inflation rate has been. So again, something that we're going to have to wrestle with here. I understand that, our constituents are dealing with that, from an energy and from a food perspective. Do they need to see it on this as well? That is the discussion that, I'm sure that you as a board will have. So with that, let's go to the next slide, which is one other thing to show with sensitivity analysis. How did we get to that 5% reduction in our retail, and just so what that number looks like? Again, just to remind you, there's a voluntary, hey, let's reduce 15% as a track record. I understand from Matt's comments, we're not there yet at 15%. And so there was an executive order that came out on March 28th to try to really require us to adhere to those water shortage contingency plans. In addition to that, I know that there has been dialogue in our own service area about the increase of groundwater. And if there is an increase in groundwater, those are not our sales, but they are our customers within our service area. And therefore it reduces, if there is an increase in groundwater, it will reduce our reportable sales. So, so for those 2 reasons, that 5% reduction is a potential for us. And here's what that number reflects. So retail, instead of being 101,300, it would go down to 96. And then just as context here, for our retail for fiscal year 21-22, we budgeted 103. So we are showing, it going down in response to our community responding, but also us, trying to encourage our community to respond. We already shared with you that additional refinery, Chevron Nitrify, there's a big project that is happening. We're timing it in the same time that they're doing a turnaround. And while that is happening, they're going to need to take some additional potable water. So that is estimated to be about 1,900. And then our barrier water is both for the Dominguez Gap as well as our West Coast barrier sales. And so that gives you a total 104,835. So those are the background, if you will, to sort of where it is. And now let's get to, as I call it, the money slide, which is the next page, page 49. This provides you that sensitivity analysis around looking both at our acre feet at 109.9, what we presented and what we are still including in our budget at 109,900. with a no rate increase and a 5% increase. So that's an option 1 and option 2. And then if we were to consider, no, let's consider a 5% reduction on our potable sales as well as if we did a no rate increase and a 5% rate increase, what does that mean? So overall, and again, these numbers have changed, so I apologize, but you can see, generally speaking, when it was an 8% increase for the Metropolitan Water District, it wasn't quite 8% for us because, again, it's the mix of our, we're a tier 1 only treated water. They're looking at treated, untreated, tier 1, tier 2. But for us, it was an 8.02% increase. That includes everything. It includes everything that our customers receive, from our capacity charge to our fixed service charge to all those met charges, our reliability service charge. And so as a result of that, you can see an 8.02. That would provide us PAYGO funding of about $5.4 million. So again, I told you to circle one of those numbers, which was $29 million is what's going to be needed for our district projects to fund from either district PAYGO or financing. And again, I know we also have reserves that we may be able to tap into, but at some point, we will need to press the brakes on pulling too much from our reserves because of either other considerations from a long-term perspective and what our policy states as well. Overall, our coverage would be at 1.25, and you can see there listed down at the bottom. Our target has been is 1.75. We are legally required by our bond documents to be at a 1.15. So that gives us a little bit of a buffer, if you will, for that 1.25. Moving over to option 2, which is, hey, if I did a 5% increase, well, how does that change things? You can see we have slightly more for PAYGO funding of about $1.4 million. And it does increase our coverage calculation. And the overall rate impact is, while it's a 5% to us, to our overall customers, it goes up 0.75%. So that's just the sort of parameters there. And it's really just because our numerator, if you will, is different than the denominator. And so therefore the percentage changes a little bit there. But going on to option 3 and 4, again, if we had that reduced sales with no RSC, meaning no increase on our on our reliability service charge, you can see again it's at 8.02. What does that mean though? Because we have less sales, that means we're going to bring less PAYGO funding in. So now we're only bringing $3.6 million of PAYGO funding in to help, defray, if you will, $29 million worth of capital projects that are not otherwise, being collected from grants or customers or through a state loan. That there would give us a coverage of about 1.17. I will just tell you that makes me a little bit nervous. That's a little bit too close to our debt covenant ratio that's required by bonds documents. But again, sharing you the numbers that's there. Option 4, again, 5% reduction in our sales, but doing a 5% reduction or increase on our reliability service charge. You can see, again, the numbers are overall the same, and that would provide you PAYGO funding of about $5 million, but our coverage would drop to 1.23. Before I open it up to questions and comments, because I'm sure there will be a few, I just wanted to share with you with the decisions made by Metropolitan Water District yesterday with the board. Wanted just to share with you that the overall rate effective. So if you go to the option 1, I'm just sharing the numbers that are there. You will see that the option 1 would put us at a 5.5% increase. So while Met says 5, what it means to us is actually overall 5%. 5.5%. Again, I have not raised my rates, if you will. They are still effectively staying the same, but that 5% translates to a 5.5% to us. And if we were to move to a 5% increase on our RC on top of that, that number becomes 6.28. Again, same sort of differential, if you will, that's there. So to our customers, if we were to do a rate increase, you would see that a 6.28. So what does that mean, though? Because of the reduction in the Metropolitan Water District number that's there, it does actually start to reduce sort of the available PAYGO funding that's available to us and our coverage. But again, we can incorporate all of that going forward and share that information out on the 27th. But just wanted to provide you that it's not 802 and 877 anymore. It's actually 5.5 and 6.28. And with that, I now will take a pause because I'm sure there will be questions in this area.
Come on, she was sure there are going to be questions.
I was
What are your
sure.
questions?
Again, and again, I will just share because I know a question was raised earlier on. Are we making decisions today? No, I wanted just to provide you sensitivity analysis around there. Receive your input. We will incorporate, like I said, Metropolitan's numbers here, and you will see this again on the 27th when we do our long-range financial forecast. But again, we are in a position where your input would be important to us to hear because we have coverage requirements that's there. We have pay-go funding requirements that's there. We have sensitivity to rate increases. And so I wanted to make sure I lay out those options there. But maybe I did a great job and we can just show you what that looks like on the overall.
President Deere?
Yes. Go ahead.
And perhaps, Margaret, maybe you could add some extended discussion of our debt coverage ratio as it relates to these options. In particular, option 3, if we were to see less sales, but not increase our RSC, well, the numbers will change, once we factor in, the Met board decision. But, we're close to our minimum coverage, with the presentation that you have right in front of us.
Yeah, and in fact, I believe actually, if I remember correctly, I believe that it does make us drop below our 117. I think now down below, even below our 115 to maybe even 113. So we would not be in a good position, and I believe that we would start to have to provide notice to our bondholders that we did not meet our legal debt covenant requirements. So there is, like I said, sensitivity around that. And again, what we're seeing, that anticipation of that 5% decrease there, it's trying to figure it out. I will just give you a tease for next week. We did see an increase in our March sales compared to March of last year, and even compared to what we thought March would be, it was actually higher in both cases. And so I'm not sure why we had such an uptick there. I know it was a warm month, but that being said, it certainly it does put us in a position where we are still, having to work, with our community to really heed, if you will, the messaging around drought.
Thank you, Margaret.
You're welcome. All right. I will then move on to just showing what those numbers look like for you. So if we move to page 50 of your packet. So page 50 of the packet, again, wanted just to show you with you those operating expenses, again, what that looked like when we had no RSC increase. So that's that middle column. And then if we have a 5% increase, you can see what that's there. And this here is really just reflecting the expense side. So again, if we had that increase in that 5%, you really are only seeing that change in that last line item, that designated fund / pay-go funding. And so you can see that's where we get that $1.4 million adjustment that's there. But again, you can see that our budget has increased, but again, it's because it's increased about $11 million on our imported water purchases. And again, this assumes the 8%. So my apologies that these numbers will change as well. But just from context, that's there. Recycle water operations has gone up about $7 million. Our technical planning certainly has gone up because of the additional contribution that's required not required, but requested, if you will, as part of the MBR study. But you do see a decline, if you will, on our designated funds pay-go when you compare to 21-22, where we were showing about $14 million. Now we see that that's less, about half of the number that you see there. And if we go to the next slide, that just gives you a breakdown by program so that you can kind of see that the biggest portion here is our water purchases. And then we have some other big numbers reflected there. Recycle water operations is a big one, and our debt service is another big one. So those three are certainly most important for us to note. Again, not to say that those other programs are not important, absolutely important to the overall mission, but from a dollar fiscal impact, those are the three most notable big dollars that you see there. And then moving to the next slide, page 52, you see the breakdown by accounts. And I think this is also important for you to understand, sort of like, well, okay, we're having some difficult times. Let's cut some costs. Let's figure out what we can do to make this work. I wanted just to share with you, and I can kind of provide you some additional context here with the percentages behind it. But you can see here that ugly yellow orange, I don't know what color it is, that imported water pitcher is the biggest portion that's there. And that is followed by our debt service in gray, our chemicals in orange, our utilities in blue, and our contract labor in green. So most of that makes up a big percentage, if you will, to our overall budget, probably 75% of it. And then if you start to think about some of the other costs that are, I will say, dependent upon either our recycled water system or our staffing, if you will, overall, you get to a place where we have a very small wedge of sort of choices here, if you will, to sort of make a real impact, if you will, onto the overall budget. So I wanted just to provide that context for you. So as you, again, consider these things and see more information there, you'll see sort of what it is. And I will just make a note to myself. I wanted to share with you what those percentages look like, because sometimes you can't see what that really means, but I will provide that to you so that you can see those percentages there. Moving on to the next slide, which is our operating revenues. This is what it would look like in the, again, fiscal year 21-22, $224 million. In the no reliability service charge increase, it's $237 million. And if it goes to 5% increase on the reliability service charge, it's $239 million. Most notably, you'll see some increases there in our imported water sales. Certainly that has gone up. Our recycled water sales has gone up just slightly when we go from the 0 to the 5%. It goes up a little bit because of some changes on how we can calculate that number there. And then in other areas there, they remain relatively flat. Standby charges, you can see where we thought we were going to be last year at $6 million is actually going to be like $7 million. So that's nice for us in this 1 year. And then you can see the rest of the numbers there, again, to a total of 239. And if you go to the next page, which is page 54, page 54 shows you that sort of breakdown on the revenue side. So that revenue side shows you sort of the majority of our revenues do come from our water sales, a little bit from our capacity charge, a little bit from here, more from our recycled water sales. And so we can certainly see that. So we're very much usage driven, if you will, in our revenue scheme. And in fact, if we go to the last slide before the final section, is I wanted just to provide to you just a general context here of sort of our fixed variable, and maybe a better word to use is usage driven. So on the revenue side, you can see about 89% of our revenues is driven from usage driven there. So if our sales assumptions are wrong, meaning that they're lower or they're higher, that could change certainly our revenue picture that's there. 11% of our revenues do come from those other sources, standbys, interest income, conservation incentives, those kind of things. On the flip side, on the operating expenses, you can see there that it's a different percentage that's there. So 32% of our costs are fixed, and about 68% of it is usage driven. So not all of our costs, if you will, within our recycled water operations is necessarily a variable cost. Certain costs are, such as chemicals and utilities, but other costs such as facility maintenance and lab services and permits, those are not necessarily will be different because you sell one more acre feet or sell one less acre feet. So there's certain fixed costs associated with that. And so you can see that we also, have that sort of picture that we will need to look at. And I think that is important for us in a 5-year forecast outlook as well, to sort of understand sort of what that mix and how can we see how we can get these closer together, that the blue wedges look like similar and the orange wedges look similar as we plan that out into the future. So that takes me to the end of that section. The remaining pages that you see in your presentation is just to give you a highlight of the upcoming presentations. I've already mentioned them several times. April 20th is our capital planning and project and funding discussion. April 27th is our long-range financial plan. And April 28th, as I mentioned, is our customer agency workshop. And with that, there's a few more slides that tells you what we're planning to discuss at each one of those items, but I don't plan to review it here. That takes me to the end of my prepared comments. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Greg, for any closing comments from you before we see if there's any questions from the board.
Thank you, Margaret, for a really excellent presentation, very thorough and responsive to our director's concerns and questions from the prior workshops, and very great engagement in the roundtable discussion today. So with that, President Deere, would there be any further questions on this item?
Let me ask my colleagues, are there any questions? Apparently they've been well informed. Please go on.
Okay, well, Al, will turn it back over to you. We could continue with our standing agenda.
Okay, there are no closed session items. So we'll go to director's comments and future agenda items. Are there any director's comments? Director Houston? I thought I saw you. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, all I wanted to say, again, thank you, Margaret. I thought it was quite comprehensive. I look forward to when you guys get the new numbers plugged in. You can send that out, however you do that, to us with what Met did yesterday. I definitely, I didn't ask any questions on that sensitivity analysis because I really need to look at that and let that kind of sink in as to the different thoughts and options you guys were talking about. So I may also reach out to you and the general manager, for some more thoughts on that, and do look forward to hearing that discussion down the road. So we can look at the best option. I'm definitely leery of the target debt coverage ratio, as you mentioned. So, but like I say, I want to digest that a little bit. And last but not least, I just want to say too, this is our new general manager's first meeting, in his stead. And so I just want to congratulate him. And so far, so good. So far, it was smooth, Greg. So, you got pulled right into the fire. And, I think this was a good meeting. So thank you to you and all the staff. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Richard Houston. Someone else had a comment?
I'm sorry, I should interrupt. I was just going to say thank you, Director Houston, for those kind remarks, and also to echo his comment and thanking staff, in particular Margaret and Marianne, for walking me through the budget presentation in advance and helping me get up to speed.
Well, as a school teacher, I have to give Margaret a gold star again for today's work.
Thank you.
Other comments from colleagues? All right, we have under any director's comments at all? If not, we can adjourn, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.